Alright, I'm just doing some asteroid mining here, getting some dilithium, and then kind of musing as I go along. But the subject of the day that I've been thinking about is social justice, and I watched a video earlier today with Douglas Murray, and he was giving commentary. He was also promoting his new book. I can't remember what the title was, but it got me thinking about a few things. And these are things that concern me. So I'll just make my position clear from the get-go. I'm not a huge fan of social justice. I'm not. And there's some particular reasons for that. I think some of them are fairly obvious criticisms. I made a video the other day where I was talking about the safe space, and I looked up the definition of safe space, and it said a place where certain groups of people, usually oppressed people, have a place where they are spared from negativity and criticism. And I thought, well, sometimes maybe people need criticism. When you get criticized, sometimes it's just mean, and you're just like, well, I don't know if I need to put up with that, thanks for the feedback, but no thank you. And it's good to know when to do that and when to accept criticism. And I feel like something about social justice is very coddling, where it's like certain groups of people, it's just like, well, you're just so fragile, people shouldn't say things to you. Like, you want to be, here's the rub here. You want your lifestyle and your identity. I think all of these identities are very flimsy. They're just characteristics of people, but they're not really identities. Calling them identities is, I think, a mistaken notion of what identity is. So, but just to say that you want your lifestyle choices or characteristics or whatever, you want it to be accepted. You want it to be normative. This whole thing is kind of a war against normativity. But the thing is, people take comfort in their norms. They take comfort in being around people who are like them, that understand them, that speak the same language. It just makes things more cohesive, and I don't think they should be ashamed for that. But this social justice movement tends to have it tends to externalize the cost to other people. It's never how can we be better and how can we do things to build the quote unquote community. It's kind of hard to talk about it because so much of the language is manipulated and contrived. But I don't want to be too critical right away. I just want to say, hold on, I'm lost here. I don't think I started the mission because I was looking for bits of ore to mine, but there's nothing, so I gotta go talk to this guy. Gives me a chance to reboot what I was saying. Something about externalizing costs, but that's not what I wanted to get at. I think there's something about criticism that is good. This thing seemed to begin with like the anti-bullying movement where, you shouldn't bully kids, but there's different, and this also kind of coincides with the whole power dynamics thing. There's different ways that people exercise power, and they're not always physical violence. So when I look at socialism, or not socialism, social justice, the line between that is fairly thin in my opinion, but I look at social justice and I say, there's so much against bullying, but I think there's a lot of people that identify with that movement, are a part of that movement, and they bully people as their career, as their job, because they're experts on race and gender and this thing and that thing, and you must do it this way or that way, and they just cast aspersions for a living. They literally problematize things. It's a technical term. They problematize. They go into journals and they write articles about how problematic everybody's norms are, and how bad everybody is, and how everybody else is just so oppressive. Do they actually do anything? Do they provide value? I hope so. I hope outside of their vain academic careers that they actually go out and volunteer and do things. I wouldn't wouldn't say it precludes the possibility, but I would say that there's probably a negative correlation between people that choose that career path and how productive they are in making the world better. I'm just going to be frank in saying that. But, I could be mistaken. I'm sure there's a lot of exceptions, but I'm just going to say in general that would be my assumption. Because I think that the motive is often just resentment. But I'm not going to tunnel down that line too much. Just talking about power and criticism. So there are criticisms. There's this idea of self-deception. I gotta wait another 7 minutes to start this mission. I arrived too soon. Excuse me. It's important to have a self-critical aspect to your life, because there is something called self-deception, where you think you know something, but you don't know something. Or you've been acting in a certain way and you didn't realize that that was your motivation. People are not transparent to themselves. And I think that should be rather plain to people with as they gain life experience. And so something that keeps you humble and something that keeps you aware, and I think just generally useful, is being subject to criticism. And a lot of times that criticism is helpful. Sometimes it's just a little too sharp and you can't take it in. But there's a lot of claims that are made in social justice about the nature of society and power dynamics, etc., etc. And I would say I disagree. And by disagreeing, it's not that these subjects are open to any intelligent debate. There's a bunch of what they call Kafka traps, where if I just respond to it in a certain way, it just proves the assumptions they would have about somebody of my characteristics and station, straight white male, etc., etc. So there's no debate and there's no persuasion. It's just, you agree with me or you're a reprobate. And that should be a red flag to anybody who's paying attention that there's something wrong with this movement. And you could say, well, that doesn't represent the movement. But again, the movement resists definition. So who are you to say, honestly? And, another thing, this is kind of a little tangent, but I see a lot of this through social media. Just imagine being somebody that's in like a conference room somewhere and a camera is rolling and you're discussing aspects of social justice, and you're somebody in private, like who would be maybe in a conversation with me, we're talking, and I would bring up some of these concerns, and you would be like, oh, I think you're overplaying that. I don't think it's that bad. And then like a trans black woman runs into the room and just starts calling everybody out. I saw a video of this happening at a conference for trans health or something like that in Portland or whatever. This happened like a couple weeks ago. And everybody was completely cowed. They were terrified. And this one guy goes up, he's like he looked like a white male to me, but he said he identified as non-conforming. That didn't give him any traction. They were just like, shut up, we don't care. We don't like you by your appearance. We don't like your attempt to appease us. We're here because we believe in power, 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 power. And so you kind of saw demonstrated what I think. Who are you to say that they're wrong? Because, of course, the movement resists definition. So I don't know if my point really came across there. But, yeah, it's concerning. When you resist definition, and you have personal definitions for words, and when people say, can you explain this? Or when you make a claim that you're a victim, can you give some proof? And then they say, well, to ask a victim for proof is a double injustice. And I have mixed feelings about that one, because I could say, say something terrible happened to somebody and everybody's treating you in the skeptical fashion. That would be terrible, right? But suppose you have a culture that incentivizes people to just throw others under the bus. And we've seen all kinds of hoaxes happen within the past year. I'm not going to name those or get into them. But we know that mentality exists. People, and this shouldn't be a strange idea to the power worshippers, the power mongers of the social justice movement. If everything's encapsulations of power, then why not? Why not extort people? Why not exert that kind of pressure and hoax and be dishonest? There's no call for verity. There's no such thing as objectivity. So who's to say what's true and what's untrue? But so you can make a claim as long as it's punching up. That's another thing that has always disturbed me, the whole, oh, he's punching up and he's punching down, or they're punching up and they're punching down. These are all arbitrary distinctions that people give very solemn gravity to, and I think it's a joke. Just on the face of it, it's just such nonsense, and it's all very, like, self-congratulatory, like, look how enlightened I am based on this, like, very arbitrary distinction. It's dumb, and for a while I've given people credit for, you know, their good intentions, but I don't think anybody should really get credit for good intentions. Just saying nice sounding words. I was going to make a point about appropriation. I'm not sure if I made it already, but yeah, catch my breath here. It's interesting how a philosophy that produces a criticism like cultural appropriation tends to appropriate everything, because it doesn't stand for anything. It doesn't affirm anything. It insists that everything is arbitrary, right? Everything is a social construction. So when you make an argument for something, you are appropriating what is necessary to make that argument, and then when you're on to the next argument, it doesn't have to have any continuity with the previous argument that you made. Because that would suggest that you have principles, that you're making argument based on principles. But this movement tends to just, for example, appropriate morality. You want people to treat you as they would like to be treated unless you're punching up or punching down. That's the exemption. They add a little caveat to that, and I think most people would just be like, you know, let's just keep the golden rule and not abrogate it. Let's have justice and not social justice. But instead, so, you know, I'll rephrase that. I'll say it again. With justice, it's just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. With social justice, it's do unto others as you would have them do unto you, unless you're punching up or punching down, and you can just assign a distinction to somebody else, and then it exempts you from having to be a moral entity, because it's all just arbitrary anyway, isn't it? And that disturbs me. I see a lack of consistency in principle. Let's see if we... How long do we got? You! Alright, I killed through those. I tore through those 7 minutes. Killing time. Let's move along. Is there anything else about arbitrary distinctions? Yeah, yada yada yada. That's not a real person. That's an NPC, in case you were wondering. Because his name's... No person names their character Dilithium Minor. Notice he has the same level as I do. You're a clone. He's a big fat phony. Let's go this way. All the ore deposits are over here. But, to continue. Let's get this started at least. This distracts me a little bit, so it's hard to keep a coherent rant going, if that's what this is. Maybe I'm doing myself injustice. I'm just reflecting. I'm just thinking in my safe space. This is my safe space. I guess I had a criticism about diversity. Now I'm just spitballing. I'm just putting stuff out there at this point. Maybe I should make notes. I had some, but I deleted them. I was just like, yeah, then I'm just reading stuff, and it just sounds, eh. But, if there were principles that you could assign to social justice, they would be inclusivity, diversity, and equity. And some of those words have different meanings than what you would think they mean. And that's a whole nother thing. Just the tendency to have private definitions of words, or to use words in a public setting that really doesn't mean what most people think it means. And I feel like that's done deliberately, Like you're kind of getting one past people by manipulating language, and I feel that's kind of greaseball tactics. Like if you guys are the good guys, then why don't you hold yourselves to some kind of principles? Oh, because you're oppressed. So I think it's less about justice than it is about existential angst and resentment and bitterness. But I've already gotten into that. See, if you don't, this is where I get sympathetic. If you don't have an ability to accept criticism, or you're not self-critical, that's what happens. That's what happens to you. You just trust your own good intentions. People might tell you, you know what you're saying doesn't make sense, and I don't think it's gonna allow you to thrive and prosper. So why don't you just dump the act and get some real ethics, get a real philosophy. Now, some of these things have a point, and I will see, that's something that I'm able to do, that I find increasingly people under the influence of this ideology are not able to do. I can make a positive argument for your standpoint, because in my view, you are standing on at least a principle. And I'll just be frank about my Christian ethics. I believe that everything that is good comes from God. God is good. And what is ethical and moral comes from God. There's something called the fruit of the Spirit. It's not the fruits of the Spirit, and they're different spirits. It's I don't know, if you're right with God, then it all kind of comes to you. And I don't know, people differ on what that means exactly. And I'm not going to pretend to know and say, well, you know, if I see somebody, I can see somebody that's right with God right away. I don't pretend that I can do that, and I don't want to do that. That's a lot of responsibility. But that's something that social justice people seem to be completely comfortable with. They put themselves in the seat of God, and then they kind of have these arbitrary distinctions, and they get to just assign who's good and bad and be in the seat of judgment. And I think it's a very laughable attempt. Me personally, I'm glad that I don't have to worry about that, because I know how fallible I am. And I know that maybe while I'm keen on certain principles, other principles you can lose sight of. And some of that is based on temperament, some of that is based on lifestyle, some of it it's just a reality. So I think we need to be humble about this. Yeah. Hubris is a word that's in my dictionary, but I don't think a lot of people have that in their dictionary. It's just sort of arrogant assumption. Like you would put yourself into a position where you're just totally out of your element, but you think that you got it under control. Interloper, that's another word. I don't want to just start slinging mud, but a lot of these social justice people just seem to be moral interlopers. Pharisees. Pharisee is another word. Pharisee comes from the Bible. There were a class of priests that were the most moral people, and they held everybody in contempt because they were the most moral people, and they attended church, and they gave their tithe, and they were anointed, and the rest of the people were just a bunch of terrible heathens, so everybody had to listen to them. Now you could say, well, thank goodness I don't have to do that because I'm not a religious person, so I don't have to deal with that kind of assumptive, oppressive behavior. But it's just like, no, actually that's happening in the secular sphere. That's happening with social justice, which used to be, I'm not sure if it's the exact same thing. I don't know if I should mention atheism plus, but I don't have anything against atheists. I just would point out that your affiliation is a negative definition. It is not affirmative of anything. So, and that should suffice, because you can, I don't know. I don't want to be too skeptical because I don't really know a lot of things. And I find if I speak in confidence, when I'm, laying out some kind of criticism, I want to be confident when I'm affirming something and apprehensive to some degree when I'm laying out a criticism, because if that were coming back at me, I would want to have the same benefit of just being gracious. And so, kind of returning to something I was saying before, I will give people credit for at least adhering to a principle. But there are many principles, and I think they all come from the same place. That's where I kind of got sidetracked explaining why I believe that. But it tends to be, if you can hold one principle, you can hold multiple principles. Unless you're like some kind of neo-pagan, which I attribute to some of these beliefs, where it's like, well, I hold this principle to be the greatest of principles, and all the other principles are expendable, because this is what's true to me. I don't know. I'm kind of dribbling off here. I completed this mission. I said some things. Some of it I think was coherent. Some of it maybe less so. But we're at least 2,000 dilithium richer, because I did the other asteroid mine before this. This is the fleet asteroid, where you get 1,000 dilithium. The other asteroid is open to the public. Anybody can go there. I think you can go there at level 1 even, if you wanted to. I didn't go there until I was like level 20. But that's an extra 2,000 dilithium you can do as a daily mission. And those are also my feelings about social justice.